Military and war movies are my specialty area of interest, and while we all love the big all-American heroes who save the world and defeat the evil enemy with as little as a knife or pistol, these characters are not always the ones that truly stand out for their great acting performances. Quite often, I personally have walked away from a movie, and I'm sure you have too, thinking that a particular antagonist is an absolute piece of shit, wondering how it was they managed to make us hate them so much. This is the sign of great acting, and it was a recent celebrity death that led me to discuss this exact topic with a bunch of social media punters who gave their input towards coming up with a list of some of the most hated villains in military and war movie history. Must also thank a couple of friends who added their 2 cents worth as well. Some were really simple and essentially selected themselves right off the bat. However, there were others who tend to creep up on you, building an internal rage that you just can't contain. So here we go with 20 absolute pieces of shit from military and war movies in no particular order. Sheriff Will Teasle in First Blood, played by Brian Dennehy, is the chief law enforcement officer of the small town of Hope in Washington and is portrayed as stubborn, proud, and highly aggressive. His favourite hobby is abusing his own power in an effort to assert his self-perceived alpha male status on his town and the greater Liggett County area. He has a deep disdain for drifters and outsiders and develops a personal vendetta against Vietnam veteran John Rambo, who he sees as a threat to his authority. Teasle's aggressive tactics towards Rambo ultimately lead to a violent and destructive confrontation between the two, which turns real ugly real fast. A Korean War veteran, Teasle harbours a deep-seated loathing of those who served in Vietnam due to a jealous insecurity based on his perception they overshadowed the sacrifices made by forgotten veterans of the Korean conflict. So, when Rambo arrives in his town looking scruffy and obviously unemployed, Teasle rages immediately and attempts to force him out of the district. His quote to Rambo, "You know, wearing that jacket, looking the way you do, you're asking for trouble around here, friend," sums up how much of a piece of shit he really is by simply victimizing someone based on their appearance. When his bullshit tactic doesn't work, he locks Rambo up, subjecting him to humiliating treatment with assistance from his deputies, who themselves are scared little boys, willing to abuse the power at their hands. Big fucking mistake. Rambo escapes and becomes the subject of a grossly indecent manhunt, which forms the basis of the rest of First Blood. Ultimately, it's the banjo-playing redneck deputy Galt who winds up dead, with Teasle surviving Rambo's revenge, serving only to wind up the shit meter on him to 11 out of 10. Herbert Sobel, Band of Brothers. Sobel is the quintessential shitbag in the war movie genre, hated by almost everyone for his depiction by David Schwimmer in the Band of Brothers series. Arguments can and have been mounted to suggest he wasn't that bad. For me, casting Schwimmer in the role was a masterpiece. Firstly, he sort of looks like the real Sobel, but secondly, and most importantly, war movie guys already carried a perceived bias against him due to his best-known role as whiny fuckwit Ross Geller in the Friends TV series. So even before you see him on screen, you already hate his guts. This is dead set genius in my opinion. So what makes Sobel so hated then? He was severely overbearing on his recruits during training, often talking down to them and forcing unnecessarily harsh punishments for minor, or in some cases, fabricated infractions. He was also known for his overly obsessive attention to detail and was accused of being overly concerned with his own advancement and taking credit for the accomplishments of others. On top of that, he was petty and jealous of other officers who were clearly better soldiers than him. It was, let's face it, pretty much everyone. Cancelling leave passes and inflicting bullshit duties on Winters in particular. But the absolute worst was his inability to actually do general soldiering. He couldn't understand geography and maps properly and made poor decisions in field exercises that would have gotten his men killed had it been real warfare. Sobel's unpopularity among his men reached a peak during preparation for the Normandy invasion. where his leadership was seen as ineffective and potentially dangerous. Overall, despite some of his troops later stating that the way he rode them so hard did turn them into better soldiers, his uncompromising approach to leadership and his lack of empathy for his subordinates led to his widely held reputation as a despised and disliked figure. I rate him 9.5 out of 10 on the ship meter. Timothy Upham, Saving Private Ryan. Upham, played by Jeremy Davies, is not necessarily hated, but rather he is viewed by some of the other characters as weak and ineffective in combat situations. He is portrayed as a new, inexperienced soldier who is assigned to a squad of battle-hardened veterans on a mission to find and bring home Private James Ryan, whose three brothers have all been killed in combat. Throughout the movie, Upham struggles with fear and uncertainty, and his actions in several key moments of the film lead to the death of some of his comrades, which is what causes viewers to hate him. His lack of combat experience and apparent inability to act decisively under pressure make him a liability to the other soldiers in his squad, and some of them express frustration and disappointment with his performance. For me, the first instance of where viewers change from a sympathetic viewpoint is after the assault on the radar station and his insistence on, for want of a better name, Steamboat Willie being let go instead of being killed. You can sort of let him off for this, as it was his first experience of taking a combat prisoner, and technically Geneva Convention and all that sort of stuff. You're not meant to be killing prisoners, but you got to do what you got to do sometimes. But what really smashes the final nail in occurs during the big final battle, where he cowers in fear instead of helping to save Mellish from being killed by a German soldier. For me, even though he redeems himself somewhat a few minutes later, this action or lack thereof bumps him up to 12 out of 10 on the ship meter. William Tavington, the Patriot. Jason Isaacs Tavington is depicted as an exceptionally cruel and brutal British officer who commits several heinous acts against American civilians during the American Revolutionary War. While the movie is a work of fiction, the character of Tavington is said to be inspired by actual British officers who were notorious for their brutality during the war. In the movie, Tavington is portrayed as a man with a complete disregard for human life, particularly that of the American colonists. He is shown committing atrocities such as burning homes and executing prisoners of war, which he justifies as necessary to maintain order and discipline. Tavington is also depicted as being arrogant, sadistic, and reveling in his power as a military officer. While the movie does not provide an explicit explanation for Tavington's evil behaviour, it can be inferred that his character is driven by a combination of factors, including his loyalty to the British Crown, his desire for power and status, and a deep-seated belief in the superiority of the British Empire. Additionally, Tavington may have been influenced by the prevailing attitudes of the time, which often saw colonists as inferior and deserving of subjugation. Ultimately, Tavington's evil actions served to heighten the conflict between the American colonists and the British, and provide a clear villain for the audience to direct their anger at. And his name is fucking Tavington, which just makes him sound like a snooty fuckwit, even if he didn't do any of the shit he did. So I'm giving him 20 out of 10 on the shit meter. Fuck you, Tavington. Bob Barnes, Platoon. Sergeant Barnes, played by Tom Berenger, is portrayed as a brutal and ruthless character who has been hardened by his experiences in the Vietnam War. He is seen as a contrast to the more compassionate and moralistic Sergeant Elias, played by Willem Dafoe. There are several reasons why Sergeant Barnes is depicted as bad in the movie. One of the main reasons is his willingness to use violence and intimidation to achieve his goals. He's portrayed as someone who is willing to do whatever it takes to win, even if it means breaking the rules or committing war crimes. Another reason why Sergeant Barnes is portrayed as bad is his lack of empathy for his fellow soldiers. Seems to be a bit of that going around. He's seen as someone who is more concerned with achieving his own objectives than with the well-being of his troops. This is contrasted with Sergeant Elias, who is shown as someone who genuinely cares about his men and is willing to put his own safety at risk to protect them. Barnes's bad behaviour is also linked to his personal demons, where he's shown as someone who's struggling with his own inner bullshit, which has been exacerbated by the trauma of war. This is seen in his erratic behaviour, his substance abuse, and his violent outbursts. His attempted murder of Elias and the killing of an unarmed Vietnamese in front of their grandchildren punch him up high on the shit meter to a solid 15 out of 10. Probably a little bit lower because he did eventually get what was coming to him at the end. Phil Secord, The Horse Soldiers. When Secord was suggested, I'd not watched The Horse Soldiers in at least 35 years, so I had to get back in the saddle for a refresher. While opinions on his character, played by Willis Bouchy, may vary among viewers, it is possible that some found him unlikable for the following reasons. He's initially portrayed as cowardly and untrustworthy, being hesitant to join the Union Army's mission. He's also shown as being disrespectful and dismissive towards his commanding officer, Colonel Marlowe, played by John Wayne, and his plans. This behaviour may have been seen as insubordinate and unprofessional. Secord and another shipbag, Gray, also engage in an argumentative and competitive dynamic with each other, which can be seen as distracting and unproductive in the context of a military mission. Men like Secord garner bad reputations because of a high level of mediocrity or, in some cases, idiocy. A few actually achieve genuine success in their roles. Secord, a politically ambitious officer who continually second-guesses Marlowe's orders and command decisions, is constantly looking ahead at post-war elections. Towards the end, he even wonders if he has a role to play in the White House. So he's definitely not a likable guy, but he's nowhere near the worst character either. So I'm going to give him a 7.5 out of 10 on the ship meter. Jenny Curran, Forrest Gump. Robin Penn's Jenny starts out as wholesome and lovable enough as a child, but don't we all? By the time she's an adult, she hits the fucked up heights with an afterburner up her ass. Jenny is a complex character with a troubled past and a difficult present. She's an abuse survivor, having been subjected to some shitty behaviour by her father. So there's a huge level of sympathy required here. However, as I always say, being a victim doesn't mean you have a green light to treat other people badly when all they ever did was shower you with kindness. Jenny and Forrest's relationship is complicated by their vastly different upbringings and life experiences. Forrest is a simple and kind-hearted man, while Jenny has faced abuse, trauma, and addiction throughout her life. Aside from the aforementioned abuse by her father, the rest was avoidable had she made better decisions and recognised the numerous and blatantly obvious red flags. Jenny does not always treat Forrest well. She initially rejects him in high school and later enters into relationships with abusive partners to spite him. She also leaves him without explanation multiple times throughout the film, using him as a fallback whenever her latest fucked up relationship fell apart, which happened a lot. The movie climaxes with Jenny showing up at Forrest's home dumping a 5-year-old son she'd previously never told him about on him, then disappearing once again, eventually dying of what is insinuated in the movie as AIDS. Forrest deserves to be treated a hell of a lot better than Jenny did throughout their adult lives, but Jenny continuously just used him to her own advantage whenever she felt like it. Hiding a child from their father for 5 years is a really shitty thing to do as well, so Jenny can fuck off and gets a 15 out of 10 on the shit meter. Colonel Saito and Colonel Nicholson, Bridge on the River Kwai. Colonel Saito, played by Sesu Hayakawa, is a key character in the movie and is portrayed as an authoritarian and ruthless leader of the Japanese army. His character is seen as evil by many because of his willingness to use force and brutality to achieve his objectives. and his lack of concern for the well-being of prisoners of war. Saito is responsible for ordering the construction of the bridge over the River Kwai, which is being built by Allied prisoners of war under his supervision. He's depicted as having no compassion for the prisoners, subjecting them to harsh and inhumane treatment, including torture and solitary confinement. Colonel Saito is an uncompromising military leader who's willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, even if it means sacrificing the lives and well-being of others. He actually gets off lightly, to be honest, considering what we know now about how cruel the Japanese really were towards their prisoners of war. I doubt any movie would have made it past the censors these days if the true barbaric treatment was depicted. Colonel Nicholson, played by Alex Guinness, is initially brave and stands up to Saito as somewhat of a protector to his men, but really it's just a stubborn, stiff upper lip style of British leadership, more intent on following rules than showing genuine compassion. His determination to complete the bridge on time and according to his specifications, even at the cost of his own life or the lives of others, is seen as an almost lack of regard for human life. This is particularly evident in the movie's climactic scene where he tries to prevent the destruction of the bridge by the Allied forces, despite knowing that it would be a devastating blow to his own army. Even though Saito is given a hall pass by scriptwriters, and Nicholson is supposed to be one of the good guys, I'm not buying it, and both get a solid 9 out of 10 on the ship meter. Stephen Houck and Philip Dickerson, Good Morning Vietnam. Stephen Houck, played by Bruno Kirby, is program director for the military radio station where the main character Adrian Cronauer works as a disc jockey. Houck is depicted as an uptight, by-the-book type of person, lacks creativity and a sense of humour. Sorry, I was laughing at something else. You'll get that if you've watched the movie. He resents Cronauer's unorthodox approach to broadcasting and sees him as a threat to the military's image. Houck's dislike for Cronauer leads him to try to get him fired multiple times throughout the movie. Philip Dickerson, played by J.T. Walsh, is a lieutenant in the military who is portrayed as arrogant and power-hungry. He's Cronauer's superior officer and he resents Cronauer's popularity and influence over the troops. Dickerson is depicted as a bully who uses his position to intimidate and humiliate those beneath him. He also tries to get Cronauer fired, but his efforts ultimately backfire and he is reprimanded by his superiors. Houck and Dickerson are unlikable characters because they are portrayed as rigid, humorless, and oppressive individuals who are more concerned with maintaining the military's image than with the well-being of the troops. Their actions towards Cronauer and others in the movie are motivated by their own self-interest and desire for power rather than any concern for others. Having said all that, and yes, they are both pieces of shit, let's face it, they aren't in the same league as Tavington or Barnes and rate only 5 out of 10 each on the ship meter. I feel like they're both run-of-the-mill insecure junior officers who are easily pegged back in line by those above them, and I reckon Dickerson's in pretty dire need of a blowjob. You'll get that too if you've watched the movie. Emperor Commodus, Gladiator. With Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus, who was based on a historical figure of the same name, the filmmakers took some liberties with his portrayal for the sake of creating a compelling story. In the movie, Commodus is depicted as power-hungry, narcissistic, and cruel, with a willingness to do whatever it takes to maintain his hold on the throne. He's shown as engaging in gladiatorial combat himself, killing helpless opponents for sport, and ordering the execution of innocent people, including his own father, Emperor Marcus Aurelius. However, in reality, while Commodus did have a reputation for being self-centered and erratic, some of the more heinous acts attributed to him in the film are not supported by historical evidence. For example, there is no record of him killing his own father or engaging in gladiatorial combat. It's possible that the filmmakers wanted to create a character who would be a suitable villain for the film's protagonist, Maximus. and therefore exaggerated communist villainous qualities. Additionally, the film is set during the decline of the Roman Empire, a time of great upheaval and violence, and Commodus serves as a symbol of the corruption and decay that ultimately led to Rome's downfall. Having said all that, it was also portrayed as incestuous, which is gross. It gets him an extra point on the shit meter. Still, though, I can only really give him an 8 out of 10, even though Phoenix did do a fucking great job of playing the role. Archibald Cunningham, Rob Roy. The real life Archibald Cunningham was a real fucking piece of shit. But the Archibald Cunningham played by Tim Roth in the movie Rob Roy is an even bigger piece of shit. He's portrayed as a villain because he's callous, manipulative, and a sadistic character who commits various atrocities. And he's shown as a person who lacks any real moral compass and is willing to go to any lengths to achieve his goals, even if it means committing some really, really shitty crimes. Cunningham's main motivation in the film is to gain power, wealth, and social status, which he believes he deserves but has not actually earned. To achieve this, he's willing to betray and harm anyone who gets in his way, including the innocent and defenseless. He's also depicted as a misogynist prick who sees women only as objects to be used for his pleasure. Throughout the film, Cunningham engages in various despicable acts, such as ordering the murder of innocent people, including women and children, raping women, and manipulating others to do his bidding. He's portrayed as a symbol of all that is wrong with the society of the time, where power and wealth were valued over human life and dignity. I watched this movie when I was new, hated him then, and when I rewatched it years later, I hated him even more. So Roth did an outstanding job of his character. Rape is pretty fucked up though, so I'm sending him to the shit farm with a solid 15 out of 10. Lord Bullingdon, Barry Lyndon. This was an interesting one that came through via social media. Having watched Barry Lyndon once, I'd always felt that the social climbing, conniving, and ultimately cruel Barry was the biggest shithead. So I had to put a bit of research into things here. Played by Leon Vitali, Bullingdon is shown to be resentful and jealous of Barry, who marries his mother and becomes his stepfather. Bullingdon's anger towards Barry is fueled by his belief that Barry has wronged his family by stealing his inheritance and manipulating his mother. This resentment and jealousy lead Bullingdon to act cruelly towards Barry and plot against him. In one scene, he challenges Barry to a duel and shoots him, nearly killing him. And then later in the story, he attacks his son Brian with a riding crop, causing him to become permanently disabled. Bullingdon is a cold and unfeeling character in a movie full of cold and unfeeling characters. He shows no remorse for his actions, even when they cause harm to others. This is demonstrated when he is informed of Brian's disability and shows no empathy towards him or his family. Cruelty to children gets no brownie points, so I'm giving Bullingdon 10 out of 10 on the shit meter. Colonel Nathan Jessup, A Few Good Men. Jessup, played by Jack Nicholson in the movie, is often perceived as bad due to his actions throughout the film. Jessup is the commanding officer at Guantanamo Bay and is responsible for the actions of Marines stationed there. Throughout the film, Jessup is portrayed as a hard-nosed, no-nonsense commander who is willing to do whatever it takes to ensure the safety and security of his men, even if it means bending or breaking the rules, which he does on both counts. His belief in the importance of military discipline and the need to maintain order is what leads to his ultimate downfall. His most significant offence is the role in the death of Private Santiago, a Marine who was believed to have posed a security threat. Jessup ordered two of his subordinates to carry out a Code Red, which was an illegal and unofficial form of discipline where a Marine is physically punished without due process. While Jessup never directly ordered Santiago's death, his actions indirectly led to it. He created a culture where the idea of taking matters into one's own hands and bypassing the proper channels of command was acceptable. His lack of regard for the rules and his willingness to use violence to achieve his goals ultimately leads to his downfall and the exposure of his wrongdoing. Jessup represents the worst aspects of military culture, including a disregard for the rules and the use of violence to achieve objectives. His ultimate actions lead to tragedy, and they expose his misconduct. He is a true piece of shit and a liability as a commander, so he registers 12 out of 10 on the shit meter. Willie Herold, the captain. If you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it, but be prepared for some seriously brutal behaviour and disturbing scenes throughout. Whilst Max Hubacher's Herold isn't the only or even the biggest piece of shit in the movie, he does what he does by carrying out a huge deception throughout. Herold is a young German soldier who deserts his post during the final days of World War II. In his attempt to evade capture, he comes across an abandoned car with a Luftwaffe captain's uniform inside and decides to put it on, passing himself off as an officer. As he travels through the German countryside, he encounters a group of soldiers who are also deserting, and he manages to convince them to join him by using his fake rank to manipulate them. He then begins to abuse his power, executing those who question his authority and even committing atrocities against civilians. There are several factors that contribute to Willie Herold's descent into evil. One of the main factors is his desire for power and control. When he puts on the captain's uniform, he realizes that he can command the respect and obedience of others, and he becomes intoxicated by this newfound power. He's also motivated by his fear of being captured and punished for desertion, which drives him to extreme measures at times. Another key factor is the context of the final days of the war, where chaos and lawlessness reign. The breakdown of traditional social structures and absence of clear authority figures create an environment where individuals like Herold can take advantage of others. Herold's desire for power, his fear of punishment, and the chaotic context of the war leads him to commit increasingly heinous acts, ultimately making him a symbol of the worst aspects of human nature in times of crisis. What adds to his rise up the shit meter too is the fact that this actually really happened. It's not a work of fiction, it's a real story. So he gets 15 out of 10. Archer J. Maggot, Dirty Dozen. Telly Savalas says Archer J. Maggot, number 8. You'll get it if you've watched it. A role turned down by Jack Palance, apparently, is said to be the dirtiest of the dozen, and in my opinion does nothing to dissuade viewers of this at any point of the movie. Maggot is a deeply disturbed and violent individual who has a history of committing disgusting crimes, including rape and murder. He's labelled as the dirtiest of the dozen due to his savage and unpredictable behaviour, making him a dangerous liability to the mission. Throughout the course of the movie, Maggot's unstable nature becomes increasingly apparent as he struggles to control his violent impulses and clashes with other members of the team. His behaviour ultimately leads to his own downfall as he is unable to follow orders and ultimately causes the mission to fail. Maggot's reputation stems from his brutal and uncontrollable nature, which poses a significant risk to the success of the mission and the safety of other soldiers. He's also a rapist, so he can get butt-fucked by Satan in hell and gets 13 out of 10 on the shit meter for his troubles. Vice Admiral Bo Cyclone Simpson, Top Gun Maverick. Another one that came in from social media. John Hamm's Cyclone is Maverick's superior officer in the main mission of the movie, and he makes it very clear very early on that Maverick is not his first choice for the mission teacher and goes out of his way to continuously be an antagonistic arsehole. His issue seems to be based from a viewer's perspective on massive insecurity and jealousy that Maverick is willing to take risks to achieve his objectives, which often lead to getting shit done his own way rather than the Navy way. Cyclone is also massively pissed off that he was compelled to utilise Maverick as a teacher by Admiral Tom Iceman Kaczynski. Remember him from the first Top Gun movie? That was Val Kilmer's character. Cyclone was not pleased with Maverick's unconventional teaching methods and therefore requested daily write-ups of his teaching plans just so he could stand over him in a dick measuring contest. However, after Iceman's passing, Cyclone removed Maverick from the project, although when the aviators observed Maverick's exemplary performance on the mission course, Cyclone had no alternative than to reinstate him and make him the mission's team leader. During the mission, when Maverick's plane crashed, Cyclone decided to prioritize the rescue of other aviators and leave Maverick behind with a heavy heart, that has to be said. However, he did feel somewhat relieved when Maverick ultimately made it back with the help of Rooster. Look, he's a highly insecure arsehole and does treat Maverick like shit, but he's no different to many other military officers who've forgotten where they themselves came from. So I'm only giving him a 7 out of 10 on the shit meter, just to feed that insecurity some more. Count Adhemar, A Knight's Tale. Rufus Sewell's Adhemar is seen to be a shitbag because of his arrogance, ruthless competitiveness, and his willingness to cheat in order to win. He's a skilled jouster, but he uses his talent to bully and intimidate his opponents rather than simply competing fairly. Additionally, Adhemar is shown to have a strong sense of entitlement and believes that he deserves to win simply because of his status and wealth. He's dismissive of the lower class protagonist, William Thatcher, and sees him as a threat to his own chances of success. Adhemar's negative qualities are used in contrast with the heroic and honourable nature of William and his friends, and to create a clear antagonist for the audience to dislike with a passion. He's bad, but he's easily pegged back a level and given a dose of his own medicine, making him look less like a piece of shit and more like a shit example of a man. Up against the other characters on the list, he pales into insignificance, leaving him at a lowly 5 out of 10 on the shit meter. Now, before I get into the final suggestion, here are some honourable mentions, some of which I've picked myself. Ben Affleck's character in Pearl Harbor. I don't even know his name and I don't really care. It was badly written, badly cast, and I just fucking hate him. Everything about him, I just hate. I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard either. Private Wit, played by Jim Caviezel in The Thin Red Line, is a deserter, and he's the fucking reason we have to listen to all those dreamy, poetic tropes. So fuck him. He can get fucked. His character is shit. And, well, it's not exactly a great movie either. So fuck him. Alan Cassell as Lord Kitchener in Breaker Morant. I mean, he's Lord Kitchener, and for that one fact, he deserves to be hated already. But he does himself no favours and is a pretty big piece of shit throughout the movie. And 3 Aussies got to die because of him, so he can fuck off. Patrick McGoohan and Peter Hanley as Longshanks and his snivelling little son Edward II in Braveheart. Both are just total shitbags in their own ways and are portrayed that way specifically to make you hate them. I have to admit, Longshanks does have some pretty good one-liners in the movie, and when he tosses his son's boyfriend out the window, I did sort of do a bit of a fist pump and say, yeah. But yeah, look, he's still a fuckwit, and I hate him. And finally, the last honourable mention goes to Magda and Joseph Goebbels in Downfall. I mean, look, everything else aside, in real life, they were absolute as big a piece of shit as anyone, anywhere, anytime. But on top of all that, they murdered their own children. That's pretty fucked up, so they can get fucked. Fuck off. And they probably should have made the main list, but they didn't because they're shit. So that brings us to number 20 on the list. Probably the one everyone was waiting for me to bring up. Corporal Himmelstoss from the 1979 version of All Quiet on the Western Front, and probably more so from the original book of the same name. Played by Ian Holm, better known to the younger generation as Bilbo Baggins, Himmelstoss is kept true to the original 1929 book and painted as a complete sack of shit due to his sadistic and authoritarian behaviour towards the soldiers under his command. As a former postman turned drill instructor, Himmelstoss takes his new role very seriously and often abuses his power over the young soldiers, treating them like children and subjecting them to brutal physical punishments for minor infractions. He takes pleasure in seeing the soldiers suffer and seems to enjoy exerting his authority over them. So, in other words, he's a narcissistic piece of shit. Himmelstoss is also portrayed as a hypocrite, as he is revealed to have been a coward on the front lines when he does finally go to the war, fleeing from battle and abandoning his comrades. This stands in stark contrast to the soldiers he previously trained and now commands, who have already experienced the horrors of war and are facing the front lines with courage and determination. Himmelstoss is presented as a cruel and cowardly character who embodies the worst aspects of military authority and abuses his power to mistreat those under his command. All that, and blatantly accepting an award for bravery after acting cowardly in his first experience of real battle, gets him a massive boot up his ass and a rating of 13 out of 10 on the shit meter. And I mean, the name Himmelstoss, it just makes him sound like a fucking wanker. Anyway, that's that. So let me know in the comments section if anyone has been missed or if you disagree with those chosen. And don't forget to like and subscribe for future episodes. And yeah, I know some will say Forrest Gump's not an army or military or war movie, but it fucking is. Everything about it leads up to his experience of Vietnam and afterwards. So yeah, it is. Anyway, I'll see you next time. And until then, I'll see you when I see you.